Hey, just as a reminder, there's a lot of information here today, so make sure that you do download a free copy of today's slide presentation over at perpetualtraffic.com/nCAC. That is perpetualtraffic.com/nCAC. And I see a lot of businesses, it's the reason why we have this slide in here. Should you subtract overhead as a part of this, trying to determine what your nCAC is? And there's no one answer. And I've talked to my CFO about this, who worked at KPMG for 10 years. You know, he's owned and operated 16 different companies. He's worked with hundreds of different companies, and he even debates this. So let's talk about some of the things that overheads. All right, so you've got your LTV, right? You've got your refunds. Then you factor in your cost of goods sold, which is basically the cost associated with the delivery of your product. Then you have overhead. Overhead includes things like payroll. All right, you've got a layer of management. You know, you have an admin. You know, your utilities for the office. You know, your accounting expenses, your lawyer expenses. You know, maybe software. We're just going through software expenses. You know, earlier today, myself and my CFO, I'm like, why the hell are we spending, you know, $100,000 in all of these individual softwares? They have nothing to do with, you know, increasing our profitability or increasing our productivity.
And so I bet you there's a lot of tech solution overlap.
Oh my God, there is. Like, we just did a merger with another company. They have some of the same systems. I'm like, oh my God, it was just killing me. I'm pulling my hair out. Anyway, the point is like that kind of stuff, those are your overheads. If you didn't factor those in, those are still things you're paying for every single month. So do you factor it in the classic way of determining nCAC? You don't. However, you have to think about it. So here's a slide I think that a lot of people get very confused about: contribution margin versus gross profit. This is not a course in accounting or high finance by any stretch, but there's two different things. Contribution margin, people throw these terms around. Contribution margin subtracts the variable cost for producing a single product from revenue. So contribution margin for a product, let's say you have one SKU that costs you, you know, you sell it for $100 and your cost of goods sold is 30, your contribution margin on that is 70%. However, your gross margin of the business might be in aggregate. We just did an example of this live on our Tier 11 Live this past week, is that there are individual products that were 70%, you know, contribution margin, but the gross margin of the business was only 41%. So gross margin includes revenue and direct production costs. Doesn't include, like I said, operating expenses such as sales, marketing, taxes, and loan interest and all that sort of stuff, which is basically SG&A, which are your overheads. So you have to factor it in. And as we're going to get to in the next couple of slides, we will keep that in mind, even though in the classic sense, when you're trying to figure out nCAC, you don't necessarily use it in the letter of the law, according to, you know, many financial resources that I've talked to, as well as private equity groups when they're assessing our business.
Fair.
But you have to figure it out. It's a cost that you're spending money on, and it's costing you money no matter what. So now, this is the way that I do it. We do this all the time. When we're pricing, we factor in, before we actually give a price, we factor in our desired profitability into our pricing. We don't see like what's kind of left over. We put the profitability because we know that a healthy business is one that is creating profit, increasing cash. No profit, no people. So you have to have profitability here. The question is, on a first-time purchase for nCAC, are you going to go break even on that initial sale? And are you going to look as a longer term in order to grow and scale the business? Like you said in the beginning of the show, it's like he or she who is willing and able to spend more to acquire a customer wins, especially in competitive markets. So subtracting desired profitability is a good step. However, you shouldn't get too greedy here. So let's get into this one. And this is the question that we get a lot, is when we're trying to determine nCAC, what should my net profit goal be? Well, we're going to be using, in this particular case, this is an e-commerce business. Your desired profit depends on a lot of different things. First off, your business model, your industry, your cash flow situation, and many more. How much money you're sitting on. Like, do you have $1 million in cash that you can, put into that you can sustain the business while you make money back off your first purchase? If that's the case, your profit may or may not be one that is in line with what we're going to be talking about here in this example here. So it depends on a lot of different situations, and it depends on a lot of like how you actually view your business and your comfort level. In a lot of ways, it's very emotional. It's an emotional decision. And what we found is that in e-commerce, a good profit margin to shoot for is in between 10 and 30% of LTV. And 30%, I think, is on the high end. If you look at like some of the biggest companies in the world, so for example, Apple, their net profit is 21%. Tesla is 17%. That like a lot of these big companies, like their profit margin is not like 20, 30, 40, 50%. When Microsoft first came on the market with Microsoft Windows, I believe the net profit was in order of about 50%, like net. As time went on, it came down to in the 20s. So you want to figure out bake this into the cake, because you do want profit, but you don't want so much profit that it's going to hamper your ability to acquire new customers and beat out the competition. So here's what you'd look like. Here's what you'd look for in our example. So if 10% is of 900 is obviously $90 profit, 20% is 180, 30% is 270 per customer. And so for our purposes here, we're going to choose sort of the middle ground, a nice 20% profit on that 900 LTV. So we're going to bake that into the cake here as we determine our nCAC. Thoughts, comments, confessions, concerns?
20% is great. I know that there's a range in that 10 to 30%, so using 20% as a base makes sense. There are different profit margin benchmarks based on your industry, full disclosure. So running with having that as a baseline, I think, is a really good place to start. But I would recommend that, depending on your industry, evaluating if there's also an opportunity to see where you fit. Because we've had clients that are operating at these margins that are significantly above their industry. And then we've had others that are operating below. And it's just the small thing I would add in is just double check. Like if you're in the service-based industry, 30% is like the holy grail kind of situation. So where you want to just make sure you fall within where your industry is, because that drastically looks different if you're selling things like in the cannabis space versus if you're selling low price CPG products, like an Amazon Basic stapler.
For sure. In this, like we used, I think this was actually drawn from Shopify for this example here. I was like, what is the average? I think it's about between 10 and 20%. And Shopify, this is where we actually got these numbers. In e-commerce specifically, for all their stores, it's anywhere between 10 and 30%. So it's about average for e-commerce. It might be different for you. Digital products, I would. Oh,
for sure. Digital products, you're probably looking at a 50%. That should be your minimum target if you're doing that. And if you're if you're an individual coaching consultant or single person service provider, you really want to be aiming for like 70%. Yeah. Like, so again, like I know this is so based on e-commerce. I'm mindful of, we've had different industries that we have worked with where they've entered that industry specifically because it's an 80% profit space. But make sure like this 20% I'm super okay with, makes a lot of sense, super clean and easy. Triple check your industry, because there are some industries that have like 5%.
Yeah.
Like
or less.
Or higher, like oh gosh, or less. Oh my God. Find a different industry. Immediately find a different industry.
Supermarket. The supermarket industry is about 3%. Like that's crazy.
No, we've worked with a lot of grocery brands.
Oh.
Maybe that's brick and mortar supermarket, but we've worked with a lot of online grocery brands.
Once again, like that's e-commerce.
Yeah.
That's how I would, so that it should be between 10 and 30%, but for physical locations. So in the case of a physical store like Shaw's Supermarket here in Massachusetts, like they're constantly teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. And I think one of their best years was a 3% net profit, because they are constantly dealing with inventory that's perishable, which is crazy to me. It's like, why you would go into that business, I don't know. I would probably have like daily panic attacks. But the point is that 10 to 30% in the e-commerce space, just like what you said, I think is we're going to use 20% as our sort of target here. But we also know that has a little flexibility. So when you're looking at an nCAC, we're going to give you a number here. It's also going to be a range because you sort of know like where your break even point, like where your profit, your ideal profit point is. But also, as a business owner, maybe you can go a little bit higher on your nCAC. Maybe you get to 17% profit, which is still pretty good in this space, especially if you're in a highly competitive niche. So there is a little bit of variability here, but we're going to go with 20% just to make things easy. All right, so step 5 here in the 5-step process to determine your nCAC is, last but not least, determine your nCAC. How about that? So target nCAC, 540, like, all right, we're using $180 profit per customer. Okay, we have our 540 after we take out refunds, after we take out cost of goods sold. We're not using SG&A here. We're not using overhead as of yet, but we are going to factor it in just a second here. So your target nCAC with 180 profit margin is 360, which seems rather high to me, Lauren E. Petrullo. However, if your overhead, let's say in this $1 million business, this is just another example, okay, with $1 million business, your overhead's $250,000, which is about 25% of your total sales, or $250 per customer, thereabouts. Actually, my math is a little bit off there because it's $900 per customer, so it's about 232 thereabouts. The point is that 25%. I know, for example, like our sales and marketing department alone, which is part of SG&A, is running us in and around 17 to 18% of our monthly revenue. So I know this 25% isn't far off for overhead. And that's just one department of our business. And we look at COGS. People are basically our COGS. As you look at it, I'm sure your accountant probably does the same way because we're in a service-based business, slightly different.
100%. You look at my books and like labor is my COGS.
Labor is your COGS, not your management layer, which is always sort of something that I always debate with our CFO about, but because they're managing the labor, but they're a management layer, so they should be in overhead.
For us, it depends on, are they contributing to performance? So our entire performance marketing team costs COGS because of the delivery of the service.
100%.
And then our admin, like my assistant, project manager, people that don't have a touch on delivery, but are supporting, they count. So in manager positions, if the manager is also responsible for some accounts and then is like the overseer, if they are on like principal accounts, for example, they 100% count. For those that are just managers, like in an HR capacity, I don't count them. But if you have people on your team that are managers and not actively touching accounts, then yeah, I would put them in a separate category. But for us, that's how we figured out. We use Evolve Finance, and there were a lot of calls in. They're great. No affiliate commission whatsoever. Recommend them thoroughly. However, it was a serious discussion we had to go through as well.
It's a serious discussion. Yeah. I mean, I know you get into customer accounts as well. I get into customer accounts as well. So technically, could I be a part of COGS? Yeah, I suppose. But the majority of my time is doing CEO stuff, which I don't really even know what that is. All I know is that I'm back to back on calls every single day.
But you touch accounts. I don't count my salary into it because I'm not personally responsible for any of it. And my delivery is in that managerial position where I'm like overseeing and supporting the strategist side of it all. So for me, I don't have an account to my name.
Yeah, me neither. All right, so determine your nCAC once again. So we just did target nCAC, which is 360, but I'm going to put in logical nCAC here because I'm going to factor in that 250 for overhead. And the reason I do that is that I think, first off, it's a logical number. It's a number that's actually you're paying out, and it's reasonable. Because when I look at how much you can pay to acquire a customer, this is far more in line when you have a net LTV of in and around 900. This is probably something that you're going to have some wiggle room on. Like this would be if I could get it to 110, I would scale the shit out of this kind of thing. Like that's a great nCAC. My friend Scott, who's been on the program many times, introduced me to the concept of nCAC zones, which I really like. We're gonna have him on the podcast. Like he kind of thought of this. I think he was smoking some sort of, sativa or something like that. But anyway, he came up with the idea of zones of nCAC.
It makes sense. It's like,
It totally makes sense.
yeah.
So it's like you shouldn't have one number like, oh, if you're 110, if you're 111, you suck, agency. No, I know that 110 in this particular case, we're printing money because we're taking into factor full force SG&A. We're already making profit. I know it's 20%. I'm acquiring a customer for $110 and they're paying me $900 over the course of 12 months. Life is good with logical nCAC here. So this is like a logical best case scenario. Could you go all the way up to 360? That's kind of your range. At
When with a
360,
zone, you're good because you factor in like Black Friday time period. If you're acquiring
100%.
new customers at Black Friday, knowing that you're getting rid of all your margins so that they can become repeat buyers off season, like I'm so in favor of this range because you have seasonality. Like if your cost to acquire a baseball glove customer in August when season's over, like that's significantly different. And oh my gosh, so I'm glad for the stevia, whatever. For the greens.
Some sort of marijuana. Yeah, I don't know. I said it came to him in a dream. I was like, I know how you came up with that. But anyway, it's a great idea. So anyway, this nCAC range here is really, really wide. My guess is if I were to redo these slides, I would probably take that 110 and double it to 220. And that would be my range. So this is where a lot of subjectivity comes into play here, because we're factoring in full force costs. And I think we have a final analysis here. 110 is absolutely fabulous. Scale it to the moon. Like figure out, like buy as much as you possibly can. Back up the truck, as they always say. I always find it's never the Brinks truck. It's usually the dump truck for some reason when customers say that to us. But anyway, the point is back up the truck at that range. 360, you're bordering on, you don't want to stay there for your nCAC. If your nCAC is 360, you need to do some optimization, but what the top end of that range is. So I would almost do like a green, yellow, red. And we're going to have Scott on here to sort of talk about that, which I sort of stole that idea from him just recently. If we do the summary here, let's add it all up, the final math. Okay. First off, LTV is $1,000 in our fictitious company. It's $1 million company in the e-commerce space. Refunds minus 10%. Take out 100, you got 900 left. Then you take out your COGS, 40%, as Lauren and I talked about. That's a bit high. So, this example is not necessarily accurate in all businesses. However, it's $1 million business with a $1,000 LTV. It's a little bit on the higher side, makes the math a little bit easier here. Take out your desired profit. We decided that 20% would probably be about right, which is about 180. So therefore, your nCAC is 360, but like I said, I would look at this as a range more than anything. And I would say between 110 and 200 for me in this particular way. Like 110 is scale, 200 is optimized, but we're still in a good scale range. But if you're going 250 and above on your nCAC, you really do need to optimize it to get it down into a lower range. So I think this is really basic math. Like this is where it comes back to, on the summary here, a lot of this is subjective. A lot of it is a bit of a feel, because the 20% profit margin can be calculated up and down to 10, maybe up to 30. How much do you factor in SG&A? SG&A is going to be there no matter what. Like there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but the point is that if you're not doing this, you're really missing out. So the point is that this is really instructive more than anything else. Do this for your business. I implore you to figure this out, because I guarantee you just doing the exercise will be enlightening for you and your team if you haven't done it already. And like I said, we'll maybe we should create a lead magnet download for this. Lauren E. Petrullo, maybe that would be a good idea.
I think that's a great idea, Ralph.
I think that is a good idea.
But I'm also going to put this as if someone wants it, the first person who gets it, the first person who talks about it and puts it on Spotify, Ralph, I think should get a call and get it personally. They should get the first sneak preview to what the download looks like.
I think they should. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. All right. So we do have this as a downloadable PDF. However, we didn't think of doing this prior. So it might not be live by the time this episode goes live, but you can get it over at perpetualtraffic.com/nCAC. That is the letter nCAC. And download your nCAC checklist, the entire presentation that I did here. Now, if it's not live, you should email TJ at tier11.com and get your free copy. That's TJ at tier11.com, and he'll send you the PDF version of it as well. And you want to do a special offer for somebody and you'd like to do a special offer for someone sort of outside of that realm, Lauren?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I am being very transparent. I have no problem bribing. The Spotify numbers are so much stronger than I anticipated. Because when I learned that 1 in 4 podcast listeners are using Spotify, where only 1 in 5 are using Apple Podcasts, I was floored. And so now I'm personally mad that we don't have a bigger Spotify following. So I'm like, okay, Spotify listeners, show me who you are. Let me love you even more. The first person that comments about this episode and getting to the nCAC page and letting us know what you think of the lead magnet itself or whether you got it from TJ directly. If you comment, Ralph, I am committing. I will at least show up for 30 minutes, but I'm going to convince you to also come on and we'll do a 30-minute call. You and me and whoever's the first person to comment on the Spotify episode.
Done.
Okay, 30 minutes with both of us and we'll go through it personally.
Yeah. Wow. That is quite an offer. Lucia, like she sucks me into these sorts of things.
That's what I'm here for.
I'm very vulnerable. It's late on a Friday. It's been a long week. No, seriously. So for anyone who the first person to comment on Spotify.
On this episode talking about the nCAC lead magnet and whether you got it or whatever that kind of component is, you have to comment on the thing and we'll do it. And then I would say because if you see the first person, I will do a second half hour, but I'm not going to make you have to do it. So it'll be
I'll do it.
I'm going to make you do it. Actually, I take it back.
You're going to make
it. First we'll automatically get it, and then we can randomly choose another person to get a second half hour, and then we can go through their nCAC number specifically with them, and then help make sure that they understand it personally.
Good. All right. Done. All right. So the first person to comment on Spotify, just to summarize here, gets the checklist, obviously, but they also get a free 30-minute consultation with Lauren and myself to help you determine your nCAC or talk about whatever you want to talk about. So really appreciate you all listening here today. And I think this is one of the more important episodes that we've done, one of the foundational episodes that we're going to keep referring back to, I think, the entire year here, because this is, in my opinion, it's the most important number. All right. So wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you do leave a review and a rating and a comment, of course, especially on today's episode. And all of the resources that we mentioned are over at perpetualtraffic.com. So on behalf of my amazing co-host, Lauren E. Petrullo,
who will also be talking to you on one of 2 calls, because the first person guarantee gets it and another person will also get it. Ciao!
Till next show, see ya.